Hello, brothers, sisters, and friends, and welcome to the Fight Like Hell podcast, the official podcast of the National Association of Letter Carriers, the union that represents over 290,000 active and retired letter carriers that are employed by the United States Postal Service. I'm Ed Morgan, and as usual, we have our national president with us, Brian Renfro. Hey, Brian, how are you today?
Hey, Eddie, I'm doing great. We got a great topic today that I think everybody knows something about and should be interesting for all our listeners.
Yeah. Two of my favorite words, overtime. Before we get into that, just want to talk about the bargaining committees out at the Maritime Institute started on Sunday. If you want to just talk a little bit about, I know you were out there on Sunday, just how things are going.
Yeah, they're going great. We're really excited about this. We, for the first time in our history, have put together, at least in the first time in the structured way that we're doing it this week, a group of 30 we call rank and file letter carriers, or rank and file in the sense that they are not executive council members. Of those 30, we've divided them into three groups of 10. One group is branch leaders. One group is a group of folks that are really experienced in terms of steward work and, handling grievances at various steps, so in contract enforcement. And then another group of newer members. And the exercise this week is to take all the topics that the executive council subcommittees that we talked about on last week's episode, that they are exploring and ultimately developing proposals for, to have them in a lot of ways replicate that work and bring that perspective that they bring as rank and file members from their various areas and various areas of responsibility, to put that together over the course of this week and then package it and provide it to our executive council subcommittee. So as you mentioned, I was out there with them Sunday night, and we'll be back out there with them later this week. And we're really excited about the work they're doing. It's a great group of people that understand the exercise and have spent the first few days of this week digging in really deep, and we're excited to see what they produce, because it's a really key component to our bargaining preparation. And in addition to all the things that we talked about previously, such as convention resolutions and official bargaining positions and other union contracts and that type of stuff, this will be a really, really important point of information for us to incorporate in the prep work that we're doing. So we're really appreciative of those people. I think we put something up on the website this week that tells you who they are, and we've on social media done some coverage in terms of pictures and things like that, and really trying to document this important work that they're doing. So they're doing great things for our members, and it's work that eventually is going to benefit every letter carrier as we prepare for collective bargaining next year.
I saw you were in my region this week too, in Atlantic City at the New Jersey State Convention. You want to talk about how that went?
Yeah, it went great. Our New Jersey State Association held their convention. They have a convention every couple of years, and having the same place every year in Atlantic City. And our state associations are such an important piece of what we do legislatively and politically. And our folks in New Jersey are just fantastic. For as long as I can remember, at least in the 15 years I've had direct knowledge and experience of working with them, they do as good a job as any of our state associations in building relationships with members of Congress, regardless of whether they're Republicans or Democrats or who they are. And it was a great convention. Got to spend some time with them on Monday, talking about all the things, the challenges that we face, as well as the things that we're trying to advance in Congress, like the Federal Retirement Fairness Act, to give our former non-career employees the opportunity to buy back their time and have it credited for retirement. Of course, but the crime issue with the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act, and then also continuing to work to address the policy changes that we need to make to strengthen the Postal Service's finances long term. So All our folks from New Jersey were there, really engaged, and it was great to have an opportunity to be with them. And their state convention went well, and I'm confident they're going to continue to do what so many of our state associations do, and that's to fulfill their constitutional role of being that really important piece of our legislative network.
So what do you got going on later this week and weekend? Are you going out anywhere out in the field?
Yeah, we've got this fall, we've got several of our regions around the country that are holding their annual regional trainings and RAP sessions. Region 9 is in Orlando, Florida this weekend, so look forward to being with them and just talking with them about everything that's going on, really. And then immediately after that, Region 4 is holding their training in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. So I'll be there on Sunday. And then in a couple of weeks, we've got Region 6 and Region 10 are also holding their training. So, there's a lot of stuff happening in terms of training. Our education really never stops. And all of our regions now, as anybody listening to this knows, it's attended one of these things. Our NBAs do an awesome job of putting together training and ensuring that we do everything that we can do to give, those that have stepped up and taken on that responsibility to represent members, to give them the tools and the education they need to successfully represent our members. So, look forward to being with our folks in Region 9 and Region 4 this weekend.
Nice. All right, we're going to get into Article 8. Before we do that, I just want to explain that, I know we're going to get deep into the contract here and, for our contract nerds, but we're also going to try to keep it balanced for carriers that aren't in the contract, but need to know this information. So we're going to kind of try to keep it on a line there to make sure that we're keeping both sides of the field in play. So let's talk about Article 8. First off, can you explain the history of the contract and the articles and how they developed over time?
Yeah, sure. I think, as you mentioned, that's an important thing to do. There's a lot of you listening to this that are very experienced shop stewards and grievance representatives, and we, of course, are going to get pretty deep today into Article 8, specifically some of the new stuff in the 2023 agreement that we're dealing with now for the first time because it's new, but also just setting that baseline for those that may not have that much experience or might be newer members. But our contract structurally is divided into a number of different articles. As you go through each and read the actual contract itself, each article is dedicated to a different topic, and you may say, where does that come from? It really dates back to the early days of our collective bargaining in what we call the modern era. So after 1970, when postal employees led by letter carriers in New York City went on strike, the primary reason they went on strike was to gain full collective bargaining rights that we did not have at the time. And for the first 25 plus years of that collective bargaining, we bargained jointly through something called the Joint Bargaining Committee with the American Postal Workers Union and with the National Postal Mail Handlers Union. And the contract was structured in a way where different articles covered different topics. The article we're going to talk about today is Article 8. It's called Hours of Work. But I point out that this started as in this joint bargaining environment because as you flip through our contract and you get into the article numbers in the late 30s, really past Article 36, you will see that there are articles, and then underneath it just simply says reserved, and there's nothing there. That is because each of those articles from 37 through 41 were dedicated to specific crafts. So in our agreement, if you look at Article 41, you will see that it's the city letter carrier craft article. And there's a lot of things in there that are specific just to the work that we do. The same is true for those other crafts that we used to bargain with jointly. So, we've maintained that similar structure. And of course, over time, as we go through multiple rounds of negotiations over the decades, going back to the 1970s. While the topics covered under each article have remained the same, there have been significant changes at different points in time to different articles. And today we're excited to kind of focus in on some changes to Article 8 that really are the most significant changes in terms of gaining protections and options and things like that for letter carriers than we've seen probably since the late 1980s. So excited to dig in and focus on Article 8. And I assure you in future episodes, we will talk more and more about all the other articles of the agreement.
If you want an in-depth newsletter on these changes to the contract and these articles, make sure you check out the latest edition of the NALC Activist. And make sure I'm gonna ask Sarah, our producer, to put a link in here so that if you want to click on it, check it out. And then if you want that edition coming to your home, just do what it says on the back, contact me and we'll get it out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Check that out. We put a lot of time and effort into that special edition of the Activist talking about the changes in the 2023 agreement. There's a really long piece in there about Article 8 that gets in depth on really, if not all, most of the things that we're going to talk about today. So if you listen to this, that'll be an excellent resource for you to follow up and keep handy to go back and read the explanations of some of how this new stuff works.
Yep, it's titled Special Edition. So if you're looking for it online or on the webpage, it's entitled Special Edition. So can you just get into Article 8 and give us a brief and basic understanding of what it is?
Sure. So Article 8 is titled Hours of Work. And that is really what everything in Article 8 centers around. It centers around the hours that letter carriers work. Many collective bargaining agreements you see have articles like this. None of them have articles as extensive, as long, and as detailed, and provide as many options and protections as ours. Typically, they are, very simple provisions. That is not the case with our Article 8. It did, however, start that way. It started that way in the 70s of basically being, an article that said letter carriers work 8 hours a day and 40 hours a week. And over time, as we'll talk about, primarily through, two very important agreements in the 1980s, it created additional options and then protections that we have achieved since then, including in this last round of bargaining. Article 8 governs all things related to the hours that we work. I will, I think, point this out right now because it's important. The original, for our union, the original intent of Article 8 was to protect those that do not wish to work overtime. And the way that has been done over the years is to create options for letter carriers to indicate what their preference is or what their wishes are. Some do not want to work overtime. Some want to work overtime. Some want to work overtime in certain circumstances or on certain assignments, and all that stuff is accounted for in the options. But then there are lots and lots of things there that place limitations on the number of hours we can work, but also place obligations on the Postal Service. And the reason for those obligations is to provide that level of protection for those that don't want to work overtime. That's a very general principle from the earliest days of the protections we have in Article 8. And our union over the years, whether it was through the 80s or the 90s or the last 25 years, the work that we've done with Article 8, we really maintain that principle that it primarily is there to protect those that do not wish to work overtime.
So in broad terms, can you explain what the overtime regulations look like now for full-time carriers?
Sure. So Article 8 covers our work day is 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. That is sort of the standard basic work day. It gives full-time letter carriers options of what type of overtime we want to indicate that we desire to work or not work. And we'll get into what the details of each of those are. And then it provides limitations on the amount of time that one can work. And also, as I said, it puts obligations on the Postal Service in some ways, almost like a pecking order in different circumstances to protect those that do not want to work overtime. So we'll get into each of the in detail on each of the provisions, but in broad terms, that's what the overtime regulations in Article 8 cover right now.
There seems to be a little bit of a confusion, I guess, probably because this is a new process or a change in the process, not new, but a change in the process. Can you explain the number of lists and what they are exactly?
Yeah, so the question of the number of lists, there are basically 3 overtime lists and 4 options for letter carriers. So let's look at what those 4 options are. Option number 1 is to not sign any list. So I don't want to work any overtime. That's what we would call a non-overtime desired list carrier, which we'll talk more about. Option number 2 are those that wish to work overtime on any assignment at any time. That used to be one singular list. In this agreement, we have split that into 2 different lists that gives letter carriers more options. So now there is the option to sign a list at the beginning of each calendar quarter that you are indicating your desire to work overtime only on your regularly scheduled day. So I will work overtime up to my maximum work hours on my regularly scheduled day, but I don't want to work on my non-scheduled day. The second list is a list just for your non-scheduled day. If you sign both of those lists, which you can do, you are then on the equivalent of what has always been our overtime desired list. And then the third list and the fourth option really is the work assignment list. It was created at this point, it was created about 35 to 40 years ago, which is a list that allows carriers to indicate their desire to work overtime, but only on their work assignment. So some of the rules and things that we'll talk about and the protections are common among each of the lists, but those are really the options. You can either not be on a list at all. You can sign the non-scheduled day list. You could sign the list on my regularly scheduled day that I want to work overtime, or both, or you can sign the work assignment list and only work overtime on your regularly scheduled day on your assignment. One thing I'll mention you cannot do, you've never been able to do under our collective bargaining agreement, is to sign both the work assignment list and now either of the overtime desired lists.
Okay. So let's get into the new 12-hour rule. So who's allowed to go home after 12 hours?
All full-time letter carriers is a little bit different depending on what you've indicated or what list you are on. If you are not on the overtime desired list, your daily work hour limitation is 11 and a half hours of work or 12 hours in real time. So if you take a 30-minute lunch, that's 11 and a half hours of work. And you now have protection from discipline in the contract that when you reach 11 and a half hours or 60 hours in a week, you may clock out and go home and you are contractually protected from being disciplined, even if the manager tells you you have to stay. If you are on the overtime desired list or the work assignment list, your daily work hour limit is 12 hours and your weekly work hour limit is 60 hours. And you are also allowed to go home when you reach 12 hours and or 60 hours in a week, and you have contractual protection from discipline. That is a big achievement for us. It's something that we have attempted to achieve in multiple rounds of bargaining and frankly around the country over the years as we fought through primarily regional arbitration for the Postal Service's continued violations of our maximum work hour provision. The one thing that really stops it is putting the power to end the tour when we get to our maximum work hours in the hands of letter carriers, and that is what this does.
Uh, so, like, what are the carrier's responsibilities when they're ready to clock out at 12 hours and they're going to be bringing back mail?
Yeah, you really should just do everything that you normally do. You know, what's required of us in terms of reporting, which starts in the morning with the whole 3996 process. We should, if you've been scheduled to work all the way up to your maximum work hour um, limitation, whatever that may be, depending on, if you're a full-time carrier, depending on what list you're on, you should certainly communicate with them. But when it comes to your tour is over, you should be back at the office and ready to clock out and go home. I will say, do not, unless you're instructed to do so, leave mail anywhere, leave forms everywhere, complete your normal duties that you're required to do. And, in this circumstance, it's the same thing that we've advised for years and years and years as we talk about in the morning when we go through the whole exercise with putting in 3996s is tell the supervisor what you need. Of course, that can change throughout the day. So you get there in the afternoon, give them a call and say, hey, here's how much I have left. And, my tour's over at such and such time. Put the decision back on them. We get paid to deliver mail. They get paid to manage. Make them tell you what to do. And it's just a real simple question. Here's where I am. Here's, what time my tour's over. What do you want me to do? But in the end, you should come back to the office and you should come back to the office in time to complete your normal duties, putting away your accountables and things like that, in time to clock out at the end of your tour.
And I asked that question just, help your stewards out there. Like, make sure you're doing the right things when you're clocking out. I know you're tired. I know you're frustrated. I've worked long hours like that. I understand. We understand. Just make sure that you're helping your stewards out and protecting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What about following a direct order from a supervisor to keep delivering after that 12-hour threshold? What do you do with that?
Yeah. First let's, I think, talk about what a direct order, sort of is. So in almost everything we do, that there's just always been this rule, still is, that, if we're given an instruction, we should follow that instruction. If it violates our collective bargaining agreement, then we grieve it after the fact. There's very few exceptions to that. One exception to that is a serious safety issue that could potentially endanger life or limb. This is another exception to that. The contract explicitly provides now protection from discipline for letter carriers that end their tour when they reach 11 and a half hours if they're not on the ODL, or 60 hours in a week, 12 hours a day, 60 hours in a week if they are on the ODL. When you get to the end, even if you're told to stay, you can clock out and go home. And the contract says explicitly that the Post Service cannot discipline you for doing that. So you are under no obligation, because the contract provides explicit protection from discipline, to follow a, quote, direct order in that situation.
So you explained the 12-hour day, the 11 and a half hours plus your lunch. Can you give us more information about the 60-hour limit now?
Yeah, so there's always been a 60-hour limit, or not always, but for many, many years, there's been a 60-hour limit in Article 8, Section 5G for those that are on the overtime desired list. There has not always been a clear 60-hour limit for those that are not on the overtime desired list, because their daily work hour limit is governed by provision of Chapter 4 of the Employee and Labor Relations Manual, which does not include a weekly limit. The new language in this agreement is explicit and makes very clear that for those that are not on the overtime desired list, they will not work more than 11 and a half hours a day or 60 hours in a week. And that if they end their tour, when they reach those thresholds, they are protected from discipline. So the 60 hour, in a sense, the 60-hour limitation for a non-ODL is new because it wasn't written anywhere previously. For an ODL carrier or a work assignment carrier, that limitation is 12 hours a day and 60 hours in a week. They are told that they can go home in the contractual language and be protected from discipline. The one thing that is different for them is they do have the opportunity to volunteer to work beyond those limitations if they wish to do that. I think, Eddie, it's a good thing for me to just point out right here. You know, we have talked a lot already and will throughout this episode about maximum work hours for non-ODLs, for those that are on the overtime desired list, whichever list or both, those that are on the work assignment list. I want to be very clear. The inclusion of this language now that gives letter carriers the ability, the protection from discipline to end their tour and go home when they reach these thresholds in no way modifies any of the other limitations that exist currently in the 2023 agreement for work hours. For example, before working a non-ODL overtime, the Postal Service is obligated to work overtime desired list carriers up to 12 hours in a day or 60 hours in a week. So we're only talking about a circumstance where that non-ODL gets up to those maximum work hours. There could also, if that happens, there could also be a violation if the Postal Service has not worked an ODL carrier up to 12 hours in that day or 60 hours in that week. So there are also additional limitations in Article 8, Section 5F that, you know, normally even ODL carriers won't work beyond 10 hours in a day. All of that stuff is in full force and effect. It does the fact that this protection from discipline now exists does not in any way modify the protections or the obligations the Postal Service has that are designed to prohibit someone from even reaching this maximum work hour threshold.
So if there is violations, those stewards should be filing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. None of that stuff has changed, and they should continue to file grievances to address those violations if they happen.
Can you explain the payment mechanism before and after this last agreement on the 1260?
Yeah. So this was a big piece of the negotiation, and I guess we start with what things were prior to these changes. And prior to these changes, there were maximum work hour limitations. The Postal Service around the country routinely violated those maximum work hour limitations by forcing people to work beyond. And years ago, we had a national arbitration award from National Arbitrator Carlton Snow, who was a very respected arbitrator, that basically stated that the remedy for such a violation was to pay the employee an additional 50% for the time that they were forced to work beyond maximum work hours. So, for example, if a carrier, an ODL carrier, was forced to work 13 hours in a day, that's 1 hour beyond their 12-hour maximum. Arbitrator Snow's award said that for that 1 hour, they should be paid an additional 50% premium. So prior to the 2023 agreement, what happened is when people were forced to work past their maximum work hours, a grievance had to be filed, and that was typically the remedy because it was what National Arbitrator Snow said. That has changed in this agreement, along with the fact that no full-time letter carrier can be forced to work beyond their maximum work hours. Those that volunteer to work beyond, or if they work beyond for any reason whatsoever, we negotiated a new pay rate, which is 2.5 times pay for anyone that exceeds 12 hours in a day or 60 hours in a week. This means that when someone is forced to work or volunteers to work over, that's an incentive. If they wish to volunteer, at least they automatically get paid the 2.5 times pay. So we are in the process of getting that implemented in an automatic payment type of system, just like our overtime and penalty overtime is right now. I think it's also worth mentioning, Eddie, related to this question, that we for years have dealt with just tons of grievances on this topic. And the fact that we had this national level arbitration decision in place about the remedy in this situation, the vast majority of those grievances resulted in that being the remedy that was paid. So what we have now is a situation where, the Postal Service will just automatically pay those that exceed those thresholds. It doesn't matter why they exceed them. The only contractual way for them to exceed them is if that ODL carrier volunteers. But that payment will happen automatically, which will, number one, it's great for our folks to get paid, of course, if they're working those late hours, especially on a volunteer basis. But number two, when it comes to shop stewards out there and branches, this is a type of grievance over the years that if it happens one day, it probably happens every day, and it turns into just a lot of work and delayed payments because of the volume of grievances and things like that. So this really should go a long way, in addition to the protection from discipline, the automatic payment to putting sort of the power back in our hands, which, as we talked about earlier, was a really important piece of this.
We are talking about the Postal Service. So has
Right.
there been any pay issues over this 1260 pay scale? And if there are, how are we tracking and fixing them?
Yeah, so this is a new pay rate. So the Postal Service has to program it in their pay system, which, whether we like it or not, it's just a reality. It takes some time. And we expect that to be done here in the next few weeks, hopefully by mid to late October. So when we go back to the summer, or the spring, I guess, after Arbitrator Nolan's award, we were talking to them about the timing of them being able to program this pay rate so that people automatically get paid. And the time frame they gave us, the first one they gave us was ridiculous. I think it went into 2026. So we squeezed that as much as we could, and the answer was October. So the decision we made through an MOU is to start this process on July 1st, knowing that for this limited period from July 1st through the point when the automatic programming is completed, they would have to make manual pay adjustments. That MOU includes, some bullet points that require them to do certain things, designate people to do this and that, information they have to provide to us. So currently, the Postal Service is every pay period, they are reviewing the work hours and then making pay adjustments to pay those that exceed 12 hours in a day or 60 hours in a week. They provide us information on that here at headquarters. We send that information out to our national business agents who then communicate it out to the branch. It has been very clunky, let's say, and slow in a lot of cases, and things are missing, and there's a lot of work having to be done to go back and correct it. But I think it's important to point out that the choice here was to do it this way short term, or not do it at all until it's automatically implemented. And we thought it was better, even knowing that, as you said, we're dealing with the Postal Service here, and we are going to have to do a lot of work. And we thought it was better, certainly, for our members to get paid this money as quickly as we possibly could, even if it's a headache to track it for a few months. So that is ongoing. From what we understand, their programming of the pay system is on track. So hopefully here in just a few weeks, this whole period of manually having to make pay adjustments will end, and that pay rate will be automatic when someone exceeds those thresholds, just like overtime and penalty overtime is automatic in your pay system right now.
So what can a carrier do to make sure they're getting paid correctly?
Yeah, first thing is just track the hours that you work beyond 12 or 60 that you should be paid this rate. Communicate with your steward or your branch officers. They'll get communication from the NBA's office and about the adjustments the Postal Service is making. And once we provide that information, if the adjustment is not there, if you tracked your hours and can provide that information to your steward, then a grievance can be filed. But I think it really starts with knowing how many hours you've worked, equating that to the fact that if you work beyond 12 hours in a day or 60 in a week since July 1st, you should get a pay adjustment. You should get additional money for that pay for whatever amount of hours that you've exceeded those thresholds. So just keep track of your hours and communicate that to your steward or to your branch officers.
Yeah, just a little anecdote there. I remember when I first started carrying, a fellow letter carrier took me under her wing, showed me how to be a professional carrier, and every day she pulled out her little book and marked her begin time or end time. And if you have to do that, or if you're putting in your iPhone, your phone, put in your notes, or you're going on postalese in light blue, just make sure you're getting paid. That's your money. I
Yep.
know, you're working so many hours, you have a family and life at home, but that's your nickels. That's your money. That's your dollars. Make sure you're taking care of yourself with that.
Oh, absolutely. And it's especially important during this little period of time where this pay is having to be entered manually while they're finishing the programming. Not that we don't have issues sometimes, even with automatic pay rings, because managers go in there and screw up our time records. But it's pretty obvious, I think, that things are far more likely to be missed or mistakes be made when when it has to be done manually like it is right now. So yeah, keep up with your stuff for sure.
Mhm. All right. Can you explain the history of the December exclusionary period and why did we give up December overtime?
Yeah, it's actually it's kind of been nothing but gains, frankly, over the years. So, it's true right now in December, we have a period, a 4-week period where penalty overtime is not paid. Penalty overtime has never been paid in December. In fact, penalty overtime used to never be paid to anyone at any time. And what we gained over the years through bargaining was that when we exceeded 10 hours a day or 56 hours in a week, we gained penalty overtime 48 weeks a year and not December because of the holiday, peak season type stuff. So we have in multiple rounds of collective bargaining proposed and discussed eliminating that exclusionary period. But the way it came about through bargaining over the years was not that at one time we got paid overtime and that there was some bargaining result that all of a sudden took December away. It was actually the opposite. Letter carriers didn't get paid penalty time at all. And we gained it in the other 48 weeks of the year. I will mention here, that's probably a good spot to mention it. The new pay rate of 2.5 times pay for letter carriers that exceed 12 in a day or 60 in a week does not have a December exclusionary period. So it is in effect all the time. So even during the 4-week period in December where we're not paid penalty, if someone exceeds 12 or 60, they will get paid this 2.5 times pay.
Let's get in the quarterly overtime list. Like, how are they made? Is that a national list? Just thinking about it from a letter carrier's point of view, they're seeing what's going on in their station. They might not see what's going on in other stations, other states, other regions. Can you get in that a little bit?
Yeah, so the overtime desired list are typically they're always local, and they're most of the time they're done by station. Some installations and some branches have, through local agreements in their local memorandum of understanding, they have different ways they divide it up. For example, some of you listen to this might work in a station that has multiple zones, multiple zip codes, and in some instances, all of those zip codes might be included as one quote section for overtime desired list. So everybody's kind of commingled. In some places, they're separated. So, but it typically is just going to be with the folks that are around you and that you work with in your section every day. And most people, if you don't know the answer to this question, like who all is part of, when we sign the overtime desired list, who does that include and what routes and what territory? You can ask almost any letter carrier, and if you're a new carrier out there, and they can answer that question for you. But it's always local and typically in your station.
Speaking about equability, like, can you just, again, for those newer people or even the older, more seasoned, I guess we call them carriers that hear equability and just shake their head, but don't actually understand what that means. Can you just give us a basic terminology of that? And can you explain the changes to equability with this new contract and
Sure.
how those lists are now kept?
Sure. So equitability is really a concept or a principle that over the years was established through bargaining and national arbitration. That those that are on the overtime desired list, that the basically that the hours and the opportunities they are given to work overtime should be made as equitable as possible. I think it's really important to point out it's not equal, it's equitable. We have at this point agreed to a lot of different language. It appears in the JCAM, the Joint Contract Administration Manual. We have national level settlements. That there's a lot of issues that have been resolved related to interpretation and how it's applied. But basically, it's that the Postal Service has to the extent they can, provide equitable hours and opportunities. Now, as I said, it's not equal because in most locations you will have carriers that have signed the overtime desired list that might have different non-scheduled days, for example. So on some non-scheduled day, there might just be many, many more opportunities for someone to work. And you just have to basically use all the precedent that's out there to look into this. And the way that we teach this in a lot of cases is for us to the best way for us to point out a violation by management is for us to be able to demonstrate how they could have assigned overtime that would have been more equitable. So it's just designed to eliminate the possibility of management giving all the overtime to one individual instead of the others that have selected overtime, and to provide, as we said, as equitable an opportunity for everyone that signed the overtime desired list. So in a sense, this has changed because the overtime desired list is now structured differently. So prior to 2023, there was one overtime desired list. And if you signed that overtime desired list, you were indicating your availability to work overtime on your regularly scheduled day, on any assignment, or on your non-scheduled day. Now we have within the overtime desired list two lists, and those lists are the non-scheduled day list and the regularly scheduled day list. The way equitability is applied has not changed. However, where it is applied, so to speak, has changed. And the agreement is that even with these two new lists, that every carrier that signs them, you just have to be made equitable with the other people on that same list. So if you've got 10 people in this section or this station that are on the regularly scheduled day list. They have to be made equitable with one another using the same equitability principles and the interpretations and all that stuff, applying it the same way we always have. You then have those that are on the non-scheduled day list. They have to be made equitable with everyone else on the non-scheduled day list. So two lists, two different sets of equitability. A very common question that I'll bring up here is you can sign both lists. So when you sign both lists, you've indicated that you are effectively available for overtime on your non-scheduled day or your regularly scheduled day, which is the same as what the overtime desired list has been for many years previously. How does equitability work there? And the answer is much simpler than you might think. The answer is that you are on both lists. So over on the regularly scheduled day list, you got to be made equitable with the people on that list. And on the non-scheduled day list, you have to be made equitable with the people that are on that list. So we honestly, through the collective bargaining process, we went through, I wouldn't even venture to guess how many possible ways to do this. And eventually, got to the point of the Postal Service being agreeable to do it in what we thought was the most simplistic way we could. And doing equitability the same way we've always done it, but identifying, who you have to be made equitable with on each of the lists.
So get a little bit deeper into the weeds here. If you are on both lists and you're in the quarter and you want to get off of one or both lists, are you still able to do that, or are you allowed to do that now?
Yes, you can get off of one or both lists. The best way to view this is these lists are both overtime desired lists, but they sort of sit separately. You can sign both. If you sign both and get off of one, you are still on the other one until you decide to get off of that list. However, once you get off in the middle of a quarter, you cannot get back on that list until the beginning of the next quarter.
I think this is a great time to make sure you thank your stewards, because
Yeah.
they have to do all this, figuring out this math and do their job and then all this other stuff. Make sure you're thanking your stewards every day, because they do a great
Absolutely.
job for you.
Yep. Because the steward is, the manager should know who's on what list and all that stuff. We all know how that goes sometimes, but I can assure you that your steward is the one person in that building that, as Eddie said, they're having to keep track of all of this stuff. And they also are probably having to answer a million questions, especially early on because it's new, in addition to keeping track with it. And stewards do what they do because they care about the folks that they work with and the folks they represent. So absolutely, they're worthy of thanks all the time, but especially when it comes to implementing something new like this.
So what are the carrier's responsibility to make sure that they're equitable? Like, what do they need to do?
Yeah, I think, of course, as we talked about earlier, just track their work hours, of course, how much they work. And then when if your steward at the end of the quarter comes to you and asks you to write a statement or ask you a question about your availability on a certain day, or it could be any variety of scenarios. Just be cooperative with them, give them the information they need, and understand that the job they're doing is representing everyone, but is primarily enforcing the equitability provisions of the contract. So keep track of what you have worked. It certainly helps that if you've indicated that you want to be on the overtime desired list, to be available as much as you can. If you are part of equitability is availability, frankly, because if someone's not available to work overtime, that could be considered an opportunity. I mean, every scenario is different, but availability is an important piece of it. So mainly just keep track of what what you have worked and be cooperative and helpful, to your steward if they ask you for information.
So I know you might have answered part of this or all of this question, but I just want to make sure we get it all the way out there. So
Yeah.
the term equability, how's it defined and determined at the local level?
Well, it's very well defined if you in our mostly in the Joint Contract Administration Manual, and and the actual phrase that we use is, that the Post Service's obligation is an equitable distribution of overtime and opportunities. So I think that's an important thing to remember. The Post Service is not required to create, opportunities. Just they don't have to make work, for example. What they have to do is for the people that have signed those lists, distribute the overtime, distribute those opportunities and hours equitably. And then of course, our shop stewards, when it comes to equitability, their goal is to track that and track the number of hours and opportunities and, ensure that complies with that principle as it's interpreted and explained throughout our collective bargaining agreement. A lot of stuff about equitability in Article 8.
Do the hours worked over that 1260 threshold count towards equability?
No, they do not. So prior to the 2023 agreement, there was one exception to hours that count to overtime hours that count towards equitability, and that exception was those that work that are paid overtime to work as a result of holiday scheduling, which is done under the provisions of Article 11, not under Article 8. There will now be two exceptions, and that other exception is when an ODL carrier has volunteered to work past 12 or 60 hours, that time they work will not be counted toward equitability. And the reason for that is the whole principle of equitability is an equitable distribution of overtime or opportunities. This is a voluntary option. It's something that not everyone has to volunteer for. In fact, that they have protection from discipline to go home. So it's not a circumstance where we don't want to put anybody in a position where in order to achieve equitability, then they would have to voluntarily exceed the work hour limit. So time worked over 1260 by, ODL carriers that volunteered to do that will not be counted toward equitability.
All right, we've covered Article 8 for the full-time carriers. Let's get into the changes for PTFs and CCAs in the new agreement in Article 8.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a couple of changes I think are significant. The first is that PTFs and CCAs will now be guaranteed a day off. They will not be required to work more than 6 days a week. This is something that we've tested in various tests, and it's a type thing the Post Service, in bargaining. I don't know that it'd be fair to say that they don't want them to have a day off. I think they just generally speaking, we're concerned about, if I have to give them all a day off, how do we cover all the routes or the mail? How do we get the mail delivered in certain places? But through testing that, I think it demonstrated that it's just fine. So that's a really significant change. The other is the pay stuff we talked about, the exceeding 12 hours in a day or 60 hours in a week. There are no changes for PTFs and CCAs in regards to their maximum work hours. That remains the same. But if for any reason, any member of the letter carrier craft, regardless of if they're full-time PTF, CCA, if they exceed that 12-hour in a day or 60-hour in a week threshold, they would also get paid the 2.5 times pay. But primarily, it's about the guaranteeing them a day off every week. That was a big step forward for us. We're excited about that.
So with their day off, like when are they going to get notice by the Postal Service that they're going to get that day off next week? Do they know what day they're going to get?
Yeah, the requirement is that they got to post a schedule a week before, that includes that day off. And the, however, that doesn't mean that it's final and can't change. The Post Service, of course, can change schedules for PTFs and CCAs as they need to. But the requirement of posting the week before, so posting the schedule the week before and indicating when their day off would be, um, at least gives them some idea. And while it is, of course, subject to change, no different than, a full-time flexible letter care, for example, it would be subject to change. It does have to be posted the week before.
If that's not being posted, what does that CCA or PCF need to do?
Just tell your shop steward. It's a contractual requirement, and it's something that they could, of course, file a grievance if necessary, but should be a pretty easy fix in a lot of cases.
So we know that PTFs and CCAs, are on that 1260 pay mechanism. But what about can they still work over those 12 hours?
Yeah, no, the fact that the new pay rate applies to all of our crafts does not change. Nothing changes for PTF and CCA maximum work hours. That is governed by the language in Chapter 4 of the Employee Labor Relations Manual. It is 12 hours of real time or 11 and a half hours of work if that PTF CCA takes a lunch, which we hope you are if you're working 12 hours. So the two things are not necessarily related. Their limitation every day is 11 and a half hours of work plus a 30-minute lunch to equal 12 actual hours from the time they clock in until they clock out. The fact that pay rate applies across our craft, including to CCAs and PTFs, in no way changes that maximum. If a PTF or a CCA is forced to work over 11 and a half hours a day, it is a violation of Chapter 4 of the M. And it's a violation that should be grieved, no different than any other violation of our collective bargaining agreement should be grieved.
So I think, during this episode, we've heard, and there's a negotiation here in these contracts. It's a give and take. Can you explain the short term and the long term effects of negotiations over contract?
Yeah, we enter into every round of bargaining as we are preparing now. This is the fifth round of bargaining that I've been, deeply involved in here at headquarters. And you also, when you look at our history, and honestly, the topic we've had today, Article 8, is, maybe the best example of this is from negotiation to negotiation, even between negotiations, when you do things like JCAM language and stuff like that, you just continuously build. You almost never achieve everything that an individual or a group or really just our entire membership that we might all 100% agree on is absolutely what this should be. Like we may 100% agree that nobody should ever be forced to work anytime they don't want to work. I think on principle, we'd agree with that. But over time, we achieve things that not only benefit in the short term, certainly, the fact that the Post Service can't force any full-time letter carrier to work beyond maximum work hours is a short-term benefit. It also builds towards what we can do long-term. We've talked about the overtime desired list. The overtime desired list started years ago with there was one overtime desired list, and that was that. There was no work assignment list. It was either you want to work overtime or you don't. Now there's multiple options. There's equitability requirements and all the things that we've talked about today. So, as we look forward, of course, we would love to gain and we'll make it probably a priority of ours to gain that same protection for discipline for CCAs and PTFs when they reach their maximum work hours. Perhaps pursue, as we did in this round of bargaining, even further protection from discipline for those that don't wish to work beyond the normal limits in Article 8, Section 5F, or protection from discipline for non-ODLs that don't want to work overtime. And in a lot of ways, you try to balance what is beneficial short term, and certainly this is, with the long-term view of what we can continue to build on. And there's a lot more beyond Article 8 that fall into this category, but based on the topic we're talking about today, we think we have opportunities to build on the things that we've achieved recently as it relates to these protections.
And there is another side to this negotiation, the Postal Service.
Mm-hmm.
So what's their reasoning for having different rules for PTFs and CCAs, and how does that affect negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to one word that they'll say a million times throughout negotiations, and that's flexibility. That they've always had a flexible workforce, whether that was a career category, a non-career category, a combination like we have now of basically, half career, half non-career with PTFs and CCAs. Really, it's about, to them anyway, it's about flexibility. And look, there's no question they need some flexibility. That's why we've always had this type of some component of a flexible workforce within a component of within our workforce. We've had a category of employees that had flexibility like PTFs and CCAs do now. So that's really it. In the negotiations of achieving ultimately what we were able to achieve here for full-time employees, of course, that same type of protection, for example, was something we were looking for PTFs and CCAs. We did not get there with them in this round of bargaining, but as we just talked about, it's an opportunity for us to build on that in the future. And we've got a really long established history now of, they want to maintain the flexibility. They want to maintain this sort of gap between their flexible workforce and the full-time workforce. And over the years, we've just, every single round of negotiations, effectively, we have closed that gap. And I think, there's things that we can do to continue some of the things we achieved that we've talked about here today, giving PTFs and CCAs a day off, to give them more structure, to give them, a little better idea of what their schedule is going to be like, and give them, hopefully extend some of the protections that we've gained to PTFs and CCAs. So that's something we've done for a long time, and we'll continue to try to do.
So that's what we're going to talk about in Article 8 today. If you have any questions that I missed, you can reach out, social@nalc.org, and we'll include it in another podcast. Going to just move into a different subject here. Can you give us a brief update on the local MOU impasse situation?
Yeah, so once the contract goes into effect, just to give a little background for our listeners, as you all know, there's a local implementation period that happened pretty much over the course of the month of June. And after that, the Article 30 of our agreement provides 22 items that can be negotiated locally. So our branches and the heads of postal installations get together and negotiate, and in some cases they come to agreement on what that local memorandum of understanding will look like. In other cases they don't, and when they don't, those are called impasses, and they are sent to our national business agent's office, and we can then proceed eventually to interest arbitration with them at the regional level. The number of impasses that we have gotten around the country is pretty similar to what we got in the last couple of rounds of bargaining. A lot of them are management impasses. In interest arbitration or an LMOU negotiation. Management can initiate an impasse and say that they don't agree with where we are. Those are the kind of impasses that typically we are able to resolve. So where we are right now, our national business agents are working on getting the impasses that they've received in their offices resolved, hopefully. We likely will probably have to have some arbitration hearings out in the field related to those LMOUs. Those will probably take place starting at this point, probably early 2026, January or February. And just to give people an idea that may be listening, kind of what the primary topics that are covered, as far as what affects every single letter carrier, if not every day, then, you think about it probably every day. A significant part of whatever leave program and annual leave provisions are in place in your station, your section, your installation come from that LMOU. So the way vacation is bid, the way, incidental annual leave is done, all of that stuff is negotiated in the local memorandum of understanding.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Just, sometimes as a activist, you're out there and you hear, oh, the 22 items, and you just shake your head and don't really understand what that means, but you don't want to ask. So thanks for clearing that up a little bit.
Sure.
Again, I want to mention the activist. If you want to get it more in depth about the changes to the contract, check out the activist. We're going to have a link in the description. Now we're going to get into instead of Ask the Mailbag this week, we're going to try something different. Ask the Mailbag will be back, but we're going to play a little a scenario here. It's called, is it a gripe or is it a grievance? I'm going to give you a scenario about the changes to Article 8, and I want you to tell me if it's a gripe or a grievance. If it is a grievance, I want you to tell me what the violation is, what a steward should include in their grievance file, and what the grievant needs to do to help their steward. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Question 1. A full-time carrier hits the 12-hour threshold. They aren't on the overtime list. They clock out, and the next day they are brought into the office. The supervisor says they had volunteered to work past the threshold. That's not true. The carrier is issued discipline. Is it a gripe? Is it a grievance? And what does a steward and a carrier need to do?
Well, this is an easy one. Once the carrier that's not on the ODL gets that 11 and a half hour mark and goes home, in this scenario, they're brought in the office the next day. It 100% is a grievance when they're issued discipline. And the advice as far as what a steward and a carrier do is actually pretty simple. The steward, as we do normally, would request from the supervisor, all the information they relied upon in issuing this grievance, see what they give them. For the carrier, I would, number one, in a general sense, whatever the steward asks you to do, but probably wouldn't hurt for you to just proactively write a brief statement about the day before and, what happened at the end of the day. I came back off my route at X time and clocked out at this time and went home. And then after that, whatever else that the steward asks you to do, they may ask for something more extensive, but that might suffice. That'd be a good place to start for the carrier.
Yeah, I was just going to double down on that. If your steward asks you to do something, help them out. They're not superheroes. I mean, they might act like it, and they might be sometimes, but help them when they need it.
Yeah,
All right.
and Eddie, this is something I think is we should point this out. When it comes to a grievance file, you may have the best steward on earth, and that your branch might be the best branch in the history of filing grievances, and that grievance might go to a Step B team that is fantastic, and it may go to arbitration where we have our best advocate in front of the best arbitrator. None of that matters unless that grievance file includes the information that it needs to include. And very often, particularly in a grievance, in a discipline grievance, a very key piece of that is going to be a statement or an interview with the carrier. So, that is such an important piece of any grievance file. So, please, as Eddie said, help them out. Help out your steward, because ultimately what you're doing is really in a grievance, in a discipline grievance in particular, you're helping yourself out.
And even if it's not for you and it's for a fellow carrier, if a steward asks you to come in and write a statement about what happened that day on a particular incident, help them out. Like, just don't say, I don't want to get involved, because what happens if we turn around and it's on you the next time? We got to be unified on that workroom floor.
Exactly.
All right. Number 2, a carrier works over both the 12 and 60 thresholds in a pay period. When they get their check, the overtime pay is not paid at the correct rate. The carrier takes his stub to the steward. Is it a gripe? Is it a grievance? What does a steward and a carrier need to do?
Definitely a grievance, because that carrier didn't get paid per what the contract says they would get paid. So the carrier has taken their pay stub to their steward. That's very important, number one. At that point, for the carrier, really, you would just need to do anything else that the steward asks you to do. Chances are they'll make a copy of that pay stub so they can show, the hours that you actually worked. Something that's become more and more common is the fact that we can log into Light Blue and see our work hours, how they were recorded. That can be useful in grievances. The steward, of course, here, what they're going to do is request certain information from the supervisor. They're going to request the employee everything reports from tax that are details that show all the clock rings to verify these are the hours that are actually worked. They may request payroll records. Currently, because of the process we talked about earlier, this manual process that's in place, more than likely that branch is going to get in touch with the National Business Agents Office over the information that they've sent. So honestly, a pay grievance is among the more simple grievances that we have to deal with. I mean, basically what you got to do is document 2 things: what the carrier worked, what the carrier got paid. If what the carrier got paid did not equal what they should have gotten paid per our CBA, so it's a pretty simple, straightforward one to document. Of course, there's nothing more important to a letter carrier, or frankly, really any worker, than we get paid for what we work. So, don't hesitate with this. If you see it's a problem, get it to your steward immediately.
All right. Number 3, at a particular station, let's call it my station, Middle City Post Office in Philadelphia, management posts an equability chart weekly. When a carrier looks it over, they notice they were marked down for a refusal on that day, and they weren't asked to come in. Is that a gripe? Is it a grievance? What does a steward and a carrier need to do?
Well, this is interesting. This is a little bit tricky. I suppose you could call it immediately, right now, the week that it was posted, a gripe, but it certainly could turn into a grievance at the end of the quarter. So what I would say to first the steward, when a carrier comes and says, "Hey, on this weekly posting, they marked me down for this. That's not what happened." The steward should document that right then in some way. There's a lot of ways to document it. Probably the best way is having the carrier write a statement, doing an interview, with the carrier, just to sort of put it in the file, so to speak, should you need it at the end of the quarter. It also allows the steward to gather the facts, and in a lot of places we've had a lot of success over the years of being like really proactive with this stuff, is, going to, even if it's mid-quarter, going to the manager that's responsible for this and saying, "Hey, you recorded this on this weekly posting and that's wrong. And so you need to make up, blah, whatever it is they need to do to make them equitable." So for the steward, I would say document it. For the carrier, when you let your steward know that, write a little statement about whatever circumstances surrounded that day they marked you as a refusal. The steward could, of course, try to get it corrected mid-quarter so that by the end of the quarter things were equitable. If by the end of the quarter it's not equitable and this day that they were marked as a refusal, you would already have some documentation of that day that you could put in your quarterly equitability grievance.
Number 4, when looking at the PTF CCA schedule, the Wednesday prior to the next work week, they are scheduled to be off Monday. They make plans with their family. When they clock in on Saturday, you notice their day off has been moved to Wednesday. Is it a gripe? Is it a grievance?
At this point, that would be a gripe. So the post service's obligation is to post a schedule on Wednesday prior and to give the PTF or CCA a day off. So once they've posted it and then a couple of days later in this scenario, they change the day off. Unfortunately, that's something that they could do. And that's, the same is true with a full-time flexible letter care, for example. That's not something that's only specific to PTFs and CCAs. But I think the important pieces are to ensure that schedule is posted, and to ensure that they are given that day off. I think there are scenarios where if this is something that happened every single week and it clearly became intentional, that stewards could dig in a little deeper once they documented something like that, if that happens. I'm not saying if it happens one week and then it happens again 6 months later, but if a pattern develops, that could potentially be something that could be addressed. But just remembering, this is a newly negotiated thing that, as we talked about, we'll likely look to build on. But for now, their obligation is to post a schedule with a day off the Wednesday before the week and give them a day off that week.
Okay. I have a follow-up. So what if management doesn't post the PTF CCA schedule by Wednesday? What should a PTF or CCA do?
Tell your steward. I don't, as far as the steward's role there, it would be fairly easy to document that a schedule wasn't posted, or that if the schedule was posted, it didn't include the CCAs and PTFs days off. That would be a violation. Of course, that could turn into a grievance. I would hope that is something that, at least in most places, we could get resolved pretty easily at the local level immediately. But that would clearly be a violation of the contract, and the remedy, of course, would be to post the schedule, like the contract says.
Another one off of that. What if a PTF or CCA is not given a day off and they haven't volunteered to work straight through the week?
Yeah, that's also a violation. If they have not volunteered, then they have been forced to work in violation of the new language that we talked about earlier on. So, in many ways, the grievance is different, of course. What the steward would have to document is that they did not have a day off. That's easily done through time records. Always use tax employee everything reports, because they show everything. We would then document that, if there were any other circumstances around it that what happened, that the carrier could provide, that'd be great. But, there's no real exception to this other than if they volunteer. So if the carrier didn't volunteer and they work 7 days a week, then, they violated it. And from a remedy perspective, it would really be no different than if a non-ODL, for example, was forced to work a day in violation of Article 8. And, we would, of course, want to prevent that from happening again, but that CCA or PTF that was forced to work, should be compensated in some way and made whole for the day that they were forced to work that they should not have been.
So those are the questions I had for Gripe or Grievance this week. If you have a question, remember, try to keep it as generic as possible. We're talking to a lot of listeners out there and viewers. So, make sure it's a we problem, not a me problem, particular root, particular problem. And send them in, social@nalc.org, and we'll try this out a few more times, see how it goes. If you have any questions about the podcast today, make sure you reach out at social@nalc.org. Make sure you're checking out that activist. Make sure you sign up for the activist. We'll get it out to you. And that's what I had today so far. Brian, you have anything before we sign off?
No, I just, Eddie, want to thank everybody for, tuning in and for the work that you do every day, especially our shop stewards out there that monitor and enforce and deal with this stuff, Article 8, almost every day in a lot of locations. And we are very close to finalizing our JCAM, the new Joint Contract Administration Manual, which will have some things in there about this Article 8 stuff that'll be useful to you. And we expect in the next few weeks we'll have that available, at least electronically, before it goes to print. But a lot of thanks to our shop stewards and our grievance representatives out there. And Eddie, appreciate you putting everything together as always, and look forward to getting this episode out and doing more fun stuff in the future.
Yeah, we have a bunch of good topics coming up in the future. Thanks for being here, Brian. I appreciate it. And I want to thank you for listening and watching this episode of Fight Like Hell. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And please share the podcast with our NALC brothers and sisters. You can follow the NALC on social media, on Facebook, X, and Instagram. You can find links to our accounts in the episode description. May your steward be by your side, and may your union have your back. Thanks for listening. See you later.